Hi there, this is Diana Sorobey, and I am doing this screencast as a way to walk you through what will become a webinar that should last around 40 minutes and then open up for discussion. The real webinar will be something that happens around October, November of this year at an ELSA regional online conference. So, from around Asia, teachers at international schools who specialize in English as an additional language will sign up for a variety of workshops. My workshop is going to be about goal setting to improve self regulated learning and language acquisition. So, as I walk you through, I'll pretend I'm doing the webinar, but at this point, it's still a test run, and it's geared towards PME 800 and working in a bit more discussion of the distal goals for myself because of the context of this being a test drive of the presentation and being about my distal goal. So, my distal goal for our inquiry project was to build more student goal setting and conferring about progress toward those goals into my next unit plan. As you may recall, some setbacks happened, and I'm not actually going to be teaching a summer course next week that I had initially intended. So I've had to make this more theoretical. I haven't actually put anything into practice in the classroom just because of timing. When we set on this project, my students were already writing exams, and now the end of the school year is upon us, and there are no summer courses due to a coronavirus outbreak here in Ho Chi Minh City. So anyway, long story short, this is something I'm going to do in the fall. I have updated my unit plans, built some resources, but I haven't actually implemented this into the classroom. So forgive me that this presentation is a bit more theoretical than it will be when it's in its real iteration as well. All right, so the reason that I was motivated to build more student goal setting into my next lesson, my next unit plan, is because as an English as an additional language teacher, I think we can all relate that we get some students who stay stuck. Their language plateaus. So they begin to learn English and they often acquire that early step, the entering beginning or step one, step two language, where they're able to say single phrases and sentences. And then their communication gets functional and it stays at a very mid-range plateau. So within the international school framework, what this means is that they're usually identified for English language learning services. I think the same is true in Canadian schools. They may need additional support in the classroom with co-teaching and other scaffolds provided for them. And I teach high school English as an additional language, and I've ended up with some kids in my class who've been stuck. Some who've gone through various different school systems have actually been learning in an English environment since kindergarten. And they've come to me in grade 9, and they're still identified as English language learners, or some entered in primary school and had that identified support since, second or third grade. So by the time they're in ninth grade, to me, I don't see that as a success story in terms of self-regulation. So in the initial reading we were doing in this course, I put two and two together, and I realized that it's really a lot of the time it's those self-regulation skills. In other cases, it could be an undiagnosed learning disability. But what I wanted to do was help those students who are kind of stuck, who've plateaued with their language, and help them set some goals, monitor their progress over the course of working toward that goal, really help them be the drivers of their success, because often that's the problem, is that they disengage. Now, there's a multitude of reasons, and I understand that the why is really important in how to propel them forward. But there's some research, and I put that together, and I'm hoping that some tips and tricks that I can use as a teacher, but also listening to my students and what their motivation to learn the language is, will help. In some cases, they have been forced into this situation. Their parents want them to learn English. It's not necessarily them. I am working in a context, like I'm working in Vietnam, so there's no requirement that students need to attend an English language school. There are public schools available, but a lot of families want their children to study abroad, for high school or for university. So that requires them to have significant English proficiency. So sometimes there's a disconnect with that. But what I'm aiming to do is figure out why those kids get stuck and help them become the drivers of their success, build their agency, and let them know that it is on them, but that I'm there to support them and will be there to provide scaffolds, etc. So, Shunk and Zimmerman say that good self regulators set better learning goals, implement more effective learning strategies, monitor and assess their goal progress better, establish a more productive environment for learning, seek assistance more often, expend effort, and persist better. We've all seen these students, and we've all seen the students that are missing several, if not all, of these pieces. And it is true in the language learning context that the students who excel and uh, move through various levels of proficiency very quickly do these things. So, what I'm aiming for is to model these things for the students who don't do them and to get them to be more like this kind of self regulated learner. So, the components of good self regulation involve a lot of things. The goals they set need to have a mastery orientation. I'll go into this a little bit more in the upcoming slides. They need to set goals and they need to monitor their progress towards these. Feedback is an important component in that self-monitoring. If they set big, lofty, and meaningful goals, those are going to be challenging. They're going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to involve a large degree of learning. So those goals need to be chunked into smaller proximal steps. The good old acronym SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable is a really important one. They need to set goals that are within reach, and time bound. This is an important feature of setting a good goal. So having them check it on that acronym, there's a bunch of resources out there. That's an important thing. They need to be intrinsically motivated. And this is a challenge that sometimes our school system doesn't allow for. Like I mentioned before, sometimes it's parental pressure that is the reason our students are are learning in an English environment. So we have to find ways to ignite what could be the purpose of this actual skill. So beyond the class, doesn't matter what grade you get and what certificate you achieve, what is that a step towards in the real world? Helping them figure that out may help them have the motivation to really want to acquire the skills. They need to be open to feedback and data. There was an interesting article that discussed teacher biases. This was the one by Katz and Dack. And they argued that we have this confirmation bias. And I think to a degree students do too. That when you get feedback that suggests something, that they'll only really agree with and absorb the things that they already know to be true. But it's really also important that they don't learn to know that, oh yes, I'm bad at this thing. I have bad grammar, because that will fossilize and that will impact their self-efficacy. If they don't believe in themselves, this is probably our greatest stumbling block. Good self-regulated learners think about thinking. They have strong metacognition. And finally, a classroom that allows for good self-regulation provides a lot of opportunity for student choice and listens to the students and really incorporates their wants into the learning. So of course we have curriculum that we're bound to teach, but most curricula are quite flexible and allow students to explore their interests within the subject and the learning objectives. So how can we help close the gap between those strong self-regulators and the students who lag behind, who master things at a much slower rate of progress? Um, One of the most important things I've discovered is they really need to have a mastery goal orientation. So what that means is they need to want to develop the skill rather than some sort of external reward, like get a sticker or um, more commonly achieve a good grade. The grade is something external and it's not a real life consequence. Students need to be given choice. There was an article by Filippello et al. Who said that perceived teacher control can lead to learned helplessness. So we have to be careful not to helicopter with our students. And I think that that's something that, while I don't think I've gone in and fixed their errors, I do think that I've run into sometimes giving them too many comments and not really allowing them to deal with the discomfort of a situation where the gap between what they're able to do and the challenge that they face is quite large. So I don't want to run into that learned helplessness pitfall. At the same time, perceived teacher control could also do that if the teacher was too authoritarian and not allowing enough student choice. Providing exemplars is very important in the classroom. So I think something I also want to incorporate into my inquiry here is to provide exemplars of good mastery goals and of people's challenges that they've faced. So not just an exemplar of a good product of, let's say, an essay writing, but actually providing an exemplar of a student who picked an attainable but really mastery oriented goal, broke it into multiple steps, and worked toward those, self reflecting, entering into deep conversations and learning about that, and scaffolding the way there. So, what I've started with in my inquiry is this template that students will get on day one in my class. So, after I introduce class expectations, what the course syllabus looks like, I am going to have them start by setting a goal. So, all of my students will have, oh, I see this isn't in the frame. So, I have included, actually, I'll pause here because I'm in my screencast trying to show this and it's just staying on my presentation. So along with this workshop will come a resource packet, which I will have posted to the platform. So this is called the goal setting. It's just called goal setting. And I'm providing it to conference participants and to you, my classmates, as a goal setting template that's quite adaptable to any sort of secondary classroom. So the students are going to fill this in on the first day. It asks them to set a big goal, similar to what we are doing with our distal goal. They can include an image to help them visualize why this goal is important. And then I want them to break that big course goal into smaller goals for quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, quarter four. That's how our reporting systems work at my school. And then we're going to work within the quarter one goal. I've provided some examples of what a good goal sounds like, and I've used mastery orientation. I've also provided some non-examples, and I'm having the students set a goal for just the first 6-week unit of the grade 9 English as an additional language class. So they're going to break that into proximal steps next. Rate their current distance from having achieved that goal, and explain why it's important for them. So on day one, or maybe day two, maybe we need to set the tone for the class a little bit more. They're going to set this, and it will live in a digital folder that I will have access to, and they can have access to and go in and update. They will need to chunk that down into proximal goals, just like we did, so that they can have the satisfaction of measuring their progress towards this goal. So I'll help them break it down into steps, and this would be something I would also set a goal, and I think I will be the one to give the exemplar for the students, and I will give an exemplar of how it's broken down into several steps. Next is to explain to them what mastery or learning orientation is versus performance orientation. So linked, but again, that's in the toolkit. I won't be able to open up a separate window in this screencast. Linked to this presentation is a presentation that I've also designed intended for the classroom. So in that presentation, I will go into the goals that students should be setting. So they should drive towards an improved skill. I will not accept or allow students to set a goal for this class that's something like, I'm going to achieve an A, or I'm going to win a debate, or I'm going to something that's external and that measures them against others, but that doesn't actually have a real life application. So instead, I'm going to have them set mastery goals, and I'll model what those look like and teach them what those look like explicitly so that they understand. So there's a presentation for students that comes along with this conference toolkit. In the real conference, I'll show the presentation a little bit more, but you can find that in the toolkit. So what can we do as teachers? What we need to do is bring out and harness that intrinsic motivation. In order to get our students to open up to us and have real conversations about this, we need to work on building that student-teacher relationship as well. But we need to work on letting them know why. And I think sharing our own goals, and this can be something that we worked on over the summer, can be a very personal goal that will help them let us know. Sharing that and scaffolding how we broke down our goal and providing it as an exemplar will be very helpful. Another thing we should do, if our framework allows, is to work towards self-paced learning in the classroom. So rather than, okay, we have to be done this unit at this time, everybody's going to do the exact same things, we need to think about differentiation. And there was this interesting blog post on the cult of pedagogy by Kareem Farah, in which he argued that mastery of a foundational concept can't be optional. Our system allows kids to move to the next unit in math where they may have to multiply and divide fractions where they haven't even mastered what a fraction is and what it represents. So it's setting them up for failure. Unless a student has mastered the foundational skills, they're not going to go on to the next level with success. And coming back to that self-regulation, what we're going to end up with is a student with low self-efficacy because they have low ability because they didn't master those concepts. And it's going to be this vicious cycle. They're going to make excuses. They're going to have negative self-talk. They're going to avoid the task because they want to avoid the humiliation that comes along with it. So we can't insist on anything less than mastery of those big foundational concepts. As teachers, and this was something my school worked on this year, we also do need to know what those big foundational concepts are. I think as all of us in this PME 800 course have discovered, is we can't do it all. Nobody can. So we have to pick and choose what those really important power standards or essential learnings are that students must have. And then for those students who are struggling, perhaps let go of some of the would be nice, but these are extra for those who are ready to advance. We need to insist that goals are mastery oriented and provide exemplars of that. Focus on one learning objective at a time, especially when we're giving feedback. Because if we throw a whole bunch of different concepts at a student, what they're likely to do is just drop them all. Or if we focus on one specific targeted element, then they can get that and work towards that mastery of that foundational concept. Check-ins frequently, providing a lot of specific targeted feedback, and give them encouragement along the way. Let them know that they can do this. They have got this. We have a big task ahead of us. Okay, so at this point, I want to talk about the 7 principles of feedback that Nichol and McFarland Dick suggest that we should do to support learner self-regulation. But I've been talking for a long time at this point. So what I would like to do is put you into breakout rooms for about 4 minutes. So we're going to go through, I'm going to let you read these 7 principles that come from Nichol and McFarland Dick's 2006 article. And I want you to reflect on your own practice. So for me, I read these and I recognized as I read this article that number 6 was an area that I wanted to grow in. And this was one of the inspirations for choosing this particular inquiry project. So I'd like you to think about 2 of these principles that in your classroom you do well, and talk about what that looks like with your partners in the breakout room, and 1 of these 7 principles that you think you could do a better job of facilitating in your classroom. So this is where I will put my participants in a 5-minute discussion in a breakout room. But I'm going to move on now since this is asynchronous. So feedback is one of the essential principles, as you could see from all of these. But teacher feedback should be specific. It should focus on 1 or 2 smaller goals at a time. As an educator, I can't wait to give feedback, especially knowing the students' goals a little bit more. So as I explore the tasks that they are working on, as I read their writing, as I listen to them in conversations, as I learn about what they're reading and how much they understand, knowing what they really want to achieve will open up those conversations so much more. But it's very important to give concrete next steps too. So I find in feedback, one of the most important things to do is to break down how would I approach this? What would be all of the little steps that I would take on the back end to figure out how to get from where I am to where I should be? Self and teacher feedback I concluded was most effective, but I came across a study from a Turkish researcher named Derya Tuşku Ekin, and she found actually that peer feedback wasn't the most effective. So I was planning to work into my unit plan a little bit more peer feedback, but I scaled that back. In the second last week of this unit and students tracking their goals, they're going to have a small peer discussion. But what I find is that the value of that peer discussion will be in their own self-reflection more than it will be in the feedback that the peers can provide. The nature of an English as an additional language classroom is that the students aren't experts. They're not masters at the English language yet, and therefore they're not able to provide the most specific targeted feedback to their peers. They might be able to give some comments and give some edits, but Tushku Ekin's research was done within an English as an additional language classroom setting as well, and she found the same thing, was that the students, particularly the students who needed the feedback the most, they really struggled to give anything useful to their peers because they didn't have the skills mastered. So in my unit, most of the feedback is going to come through teacher conferences, through student self-assessments using a Google form, which you can also find in the toolkit, and through student self-assessment in a variety of ways. Now, I'm fully aware that there are some barriers to self-regulated learning that may be beyond my control. We watched an excellent lecture by Dr. Stuart Shankar, in which he described the three areas of the brain, the neocortex, the limbic system, and the reptilian brain. And basically, he focused on the blue brain and the red brain. The limbic system, the red brain, controls our fight or flight stress response, where the neocortex was more about higher levels of functioning. And he said when we engage our red brain, nothing in the blue brain will really function. So if we have students who are not feeling safe and secure, whose physical and emotional well-being, their needs are not being met, whether they're struggling with poverty or facing abuse or even just a really serious illness in the family, all of this is going to engage that red brain and it's going to cloud their focus. So Shankar said, when you trigger the red brain, it seeks security, complete certainty. The only way to help kids progress is to turn off the alarm. So that's something else with the goals that our students set, that we'll get to know them and the challenges that they are facing. And in the case that they are under extreme stress, removing that extreme stress needs to be the first priority because they aren't going to learn. And this is the reason that sometimes we find gaps in learning over a long period of time. Perhaps the student encountered a trauma that caused them to develop gaps in their learning. They may have physically been present in a classroom, but so much going on in the background of their lives was falling apart that they weren't really absorbing the learning. So that's something that's important. Unless we're at our optimal state, we're not willing to step out of our comfort zones. We're not willing to step into that uncomfortable learning zone that requires us to do something new, something unfamiliar, and something also where we're risking failure. We haven't practiced it over and over, and therefore it's likely that we could be embarrassed because we're not masters of this thing. So if life is kind of falling apart, or even just some minor stresses, this can be hard. I had my own maybe first self experience of this while we were taking this course. Um, the recent outbreak of COVID has been stressful. Lots of things had to change really quickly. We've shifted. My kids and I have shifted to working and learning from home. And in the midst of all of this, was when we were supposed to do our social media post, and I apologized and just said, you know what, I'm not in my best state at this moment, and this is not the time where I want to be leaving a lasting impression on a professional network. So I thought of what I might do if I was in Blue Brain, but since I was kind of operating under a lot of stress and anxiety, I didn't want to leave my professional mark on a Facebook or Twitter post at that time. So I can understand that there's times when we have to just be kind to ourselves and be kind to our students, but it's also important to give them a little push sometimes. Another image I wanted to show you, this lovely infographic comes from an Ottawa group on parenting and self-regulation. The author of this presentation that I took this screenshot from was Susan Hopkins. And this just shows that tornado cycle of how anxiety and fears can create this cycle of bad behaviors, poor social skills, and things that really do manifest themselves as poor self-regulated learning. However, this is going to sound contradictory. I think it's important to know our students and know the situation that they're in and be sensitive to that. But it's also important that we don't allow them to build into a cycle of learned helplessness. So I watched a TED Talk by a man called Larry Smith, and he was quite satirical, but the TED Talk was titled Why You Will Fail to Achieve Your Dreams, or something near to that effect. And he spoke openly about people making all sorts of excuses of why they can't do something that's uncomfortable. The real greats in the world don't allow barriers to get in their way. So everybody struggles with how to appoint their time. Everybody struggles with minor setbacks. And at some point, we do have to take a risk. If our strategies don't work, then we try something different. We need to be open to trying something new. We also need to be open to failure. And we need to stop giving ourselves, if we truly want to achieve a goal, we need to stop giving ourselves the out. So while we have to be sensitive and understand if our students are facing serious struggles, that we should be supportive and give them time, we also have to understand that life goes on and learning goes on, and we don't want them to suffer long term by allowing these big gaps to widen. So it's a fine line between tiptoeing around and being sensitive, and also holding our students to a high standard and giving them a push. If they say, I can't do this, or that's all I was able to do, we've all heard those kinds of excuses. And we know that those kids are capable. And this again comes back to a strong teacher-student relationship. And we do have to work in little sweet encouragements like, oh, I know you can, but it's important to have conversations. And through my inquiry, I'd like to be having some talks with my students about, oh yeah, I didn't really feel like doing this. I wanted to put it off, but look at the result when I did. So again, an exemplar of how we can push past excuses. Finally, what's this going to look like in my classroom? So it's going to start with that goal setting template. It's going to take approximately 6 weeks throughout the unit. At about the halfway point, I'm going to plan a teacher-student conference. And then hopefully the students will have some results and reflections that I can share in my workshop. This is kind of a 6-week overview, so introducing the class, teaching them what mastery goals are, have them fill in the goal template will happen in the first week. Work on those proximal goals they've identified. I have in my toolkit a Google form for students to self-complete in week 3. They keep working on that. By week 4, the conferences will commence, and I'll give them some feedback about their progress. They keep working on it, and by the 6th week, hopefully, they are seeing evidence that their goal has been achieved. They can do some reflection, and then we keep going with this, I hope, throughout subsequent units. So I'd like to conclude my workshop with the overall findings. But as I said in the introductory slides, I don't yet have those because this has had to be theoretical. So based on all the research that I've done, here are the questions that I'm hoping I will be able to answer with some positive results. And after looking at the student reflections and having conferences with them, I'll share some of their insights in how this process has helped them become better learners, specifically of English language. So were they more engaged and invested in learning? Did they have a stronger self-awareness of productive and destructive behaviors, and were they able to redirect? Did they use some strategies like self-consequating to keep themselves on track? And what could they do if they didn't? More importantly, are they a step further in the direction of feeling more self-efficacious? So hopefully by the fall, I have real positive findings suggesting that this process empowers students to have greater self-efficacy. I look forward to your comments and suggestions about how I could tweak this. This is a great way to test drive what I might share in my webinar. So I am very hopeful that you give me some suggestions. I'd like to build in a little bit more audience engagement and participation, so we'll definitely end with some discussion and dialogue. Thank you so much.